Hi and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be looking at my IBM 6276 Pentium III machine. This was one of the first PCs I got when I got back into retro computer collecting. I did some upgrades to it back then, which I kind of regret doing now, so this video is all about restoring it to its former glory and its business spec, but also giving it a little bit of punch in the gaming department as well. This is the motherboard that came with the machine originally. It's made by MSI. It's an MS6188 Flex ATX socket 370 motherboard. It came with the Intel Coppermine based Pentium III 800 on it, and it's a Flex ATX format motherboard. It has 3 PCI slots, no AGP slot, which is the main reason why I took it out, because it kind of lacked expansion for gaming kind of things like decent graphics cards and such. But I want to put it back the way that it was and try and get some gaming out of it as well. Looks like this motherboard was manufactured in Taiwan on the 21st of the 9th, 2000. Holy crap, this board's a mess. I don't remember it being like this, but we've got bulging capacitors, we've got leaking electrolyte, and it's all a bit of a mess. So I think the first thing to do is to get this board cleaned up, recapped, and then think about getting it back into the machine. So this gave me another chance to use my new Christmas present, my budget desolderer, which works pretty well, I have to say. So it's just a case of going through and desoldering them all and replacing them. There was one that I didn't have the right size capacitor for, so I'll have to replace that later, and there's some surface mounted ones on there as well, which I'll also replace later. And while I'm doing all that, just so it doesn't get too boring, I'm finishing off all of the leftover alcohol that didn't get drunk on New Year's Eve. That's it all done. Just cleaned up the CPU to get the gunky thermal paste off it, so we're ready to give it a test. Just a very, very quick test to see if it fires up and that the caps are working as they should, which is going to be a very quick post because there's no cooler on the CPU and I don't want to fry it. As mentioned before, this motherboard only has 3 PCI slots and onboard graphics, so it isn't really built for gaming. There's 2 sockets for 3.3 volt DIMM memory that can go up to a maximum of 256 megabytes. Here's the Intel chipset, which has the onboard graphics, and it is actually AGP graphics, there's just no AGP slot. The actual graphics controller inside this chipset runs at 2 times AGP. This socketed IBM chip here is probably the BIOS, as the BIOS reset jumper is right next door to it. Then there's the usual stuff, the integrated IDE and floppy drives, and there's some empty places where I guess there would be some video memory, but not on this board, and also it has built-in AC97 sound. And on the I/O panel we've got our usual keyboard, mouse, 2 USB, parallel, serial, onboard graphics, and sound inputs. So on to the case. I love the look of this thing. I absolutely love it. I think it's probably the prettiest PC I own. Big blue IBM, only this one's a little blue IBM, but yeah, it's cool. It's got this funky little trapdoor on the front to get into the drive bays. I've got a mouse and keyboard to go with it. They aren't the best quality things in the world, but it all looks super funky and I really like the look of it. So on the underside there's some quite cool information. There's some information about, it's got the initials of the guy who quality checked it. It's got the shift that put it together, and it's got the production line that it was put together on, so it's nice to have little details like that. And it was built for IBM in the UK, and then there's some details of the model number and its serial number, etc. Firing it up with the mods that are currently in the box, we are confronted with this offensive compact logo, and it's just wrong with this machine, which is one of the reasons why I need to change it. And the machine came with the much maligned Windows Millennium Edition on it. Currently it's running Windows 98 2nd Edition, but I want this back to the way it was, so I'm going to bite the bullet and put ME back onto the machine. Okay, out with these crappy mods, and let's put the proper IBM components back where they belong. The machine's a bit of a pain in the arse to work on. It's got this sort of weird contraption over the top, so the PSU actually kind of hangs down over the top of the motherboard, and you have to remove that before you can get at anything else. And this isn't the original power supply. I did upgrade the power supply to something with a bit more oomph, and it doesn't quite fit in properly. It's the right size, the screw holes are in the wrong place, so it's just kind of taped in with gaffer tape at the minute. But I'm going to leave this power supply in. Get the memory out. I had to kind of hotwire the front panel controls into this motherboard because it has a proprietary connector, so I used a lot of jump cables to hook up the front panel to this compact motherboard. Don't need those anymore. Get the expansion cards out. There's a sound card in here. It's a Sound Blaster Live model CT4760, which is the ex-gamer version of the Sound Blaster Live, and we're going to be keeping that for this rebuild. IBM used these flathead screws for everything, which they look quite classy and well made, but it means your driver can slip out the end and scratch things, so they're a pretty bad idea. And the graphics card I was rocking in here was this Radeon 9600 Atlantis 128 megabyte version. Not the best graphics card, but so far ahead of this machine, I figured that it could deal with anything from the sort of 2000-ish period that I was running games for, but we won't be using this. Finally, there's this Linksys networking card. We'll be using this again because I want to get everything networked together ultimately once I've got a base set of machines to put up in the games room. It's probably worth stripping it all down to clear it up. We've got the original hard drive, which is this Mac Store, though it has an IBM warranty, so I guess this is the one that came with the machine originally. Clear out all the cables. Nice empty case, but it's a bit dusty, so we'll give it a bit of a clean as well. Likewise with the motherboard, we'll just give it a once over with anti-static brush. There doesn't seem to be anything on the motherboard from all of that gunky electrolyte that was leaking out the capacitors, so just a quick wipe and brush will do, I think. I also upgraded the processor to be a 1 GHz Pentium III. This is the 800 that's on the original board. I'm just going to steal the CPU cooler from the 1 GHz one. They're both copper mine. I don't believe either of these motherboards are capable of supporting duality, so copper mine is going to be where it's at for this build. Once that's all back together, we can put in some peripherals and boot it up again and give it a bit more of a sustained test to make sure that those capacitors are holding up. So I'm just going to boot into the original hard drive, which has still got Windows 98 on it, and just have a bit of a mess around and make sure that everything is stable. That all held together quite well. Everything seems to be working as it should, so we can get the original motherboard back in there, pop the expansion cards and the power supply back in, and then we'll be good to give it a bit of a go. Just need to pop some of these panels back on and the funky little trapdoor. So we need to find a replacement for this ATI graphics card, and that's what we have down to the side of the machine here. It's a card that's dear to my heart because this was the very first 3D card that I ever owned back in the day. It's a Guillemot Maxi Gamer Phoenix Voodoo Banshee 16 megabyte. It's a PCI card, which is why it's perfect for this machine, having only PCI slots. And while it might be a little bit dated for this machine when it came out in 2000, it's going to allow me to restore this machine to its original business spec, which is what I kind of want to do, but putting this card in there will give me enough power for some late 90s glide gaming. And then we can get the case back together and we're good to go. Ah, that's more like it. Looking more like a IBM business machine now with its nice blue splash screen. Time to get Windows Millennium installed, and I tried originally with a Dell OEM edition of it and it didn't seem to like it for some reason, so had to go off and find another version. So I created a new partition on this drive and formatted it and trying with a new disk image of Windows Millennium, and I'm pleased to say this time everything seemed to go through correctly. First thing to do now is get this Voodoo Banshee card installed on the machine and get some funky graphics going. We've got our original 3DFX drivers disk here, so we'll go ahead, get that card up and running, and there's also a bunch of funky games on here that I think we'll use to test the card out. So the driver install seemed to go pretty smoothly, and as we boot back up into Windows, things are looking better already. Quick look in Device Manager and we can see the Voodoo Banshees there alongside the Intel graphics adapter. I'll have to disable that. We've got some other devices that haven't installed, the PCI Ethernet controller, which you know about. I'll need to find the drivers for that, and PCI input controller and PCI multimedia audio device. I imagine they both belong to the Sound Blaster Live, so we'll get the drivers on for that next. I did download the chipset drivers for this motherboard and went to load those up, but it told me that Windows already recognised and supported this chipset, so I didn't need to put those on. Sound Blaster drivers on next, and I did put on every little bit of bloatware that I could find on that CD, just because it reminded me of having all that bloatware back in the day, and it's just nice to see it again. So you would have thought that was straightforward, but never as simple as you think it's going to be. So I was confronted with this. This is when I was trying to run anything on the sound card at all, and it took me a while to figure out what was going on here. And initially I thought it was possibly a Windows Millennium thing, being such a flaky operating system, but it just turned out it was some kind of conflict on the PCI slots, and I swapped the cards around into different positions, and then everything was good. Ethernet cards back in, and we're good to go and try running some stuff. So I'm going to run 3D Mark 2000 to begin with. So that's the same year that the machine itself came out. Probably a bit advanced, probably a couple of years after the Banshee. So I'm not sure how that will fare with this kind of stuff, but we'll give it a go and see what it does. And it didn't do very well, I'm afraid. It was getting like 24 frames per second on the low resolutions, but playing the sort of new games in 2000 on the Banshees, probably pushing it a little bit. It wasn't the fastest card in the world to begin with. As you get into higher resolutions and more detail on these tests, it just crashes down to single figure frame rates. To give the Banshee a bit more of a chance, we'll drop it down to 3D Mark 99 and see if it does any better with that. So it does fare better in this. So it's sort of telling me the era of games I'm going to be playing with this machine is going to be sort of light gaming, probably glide games from around 1998, early 98, 97. And it was getting kind of 25 to 30 frames per second on the racing game and into the 30s on the first-person shooter. So I guess they're playable frame rates. So all that remains now to try a bit of gaming. So I've chosen Subculture off the installation disk, 3DFX optimized version, to see how that looks and plays and get a feel for what it's going to be like doing that kind of gaming on this rig. So that's looking pretty good. It looks like an interesting game as well. I've not played that or seen it before, so I think I might actually go out and seek out the full version and give that a playthrough on this machine. Apart from that, I'm going to be doing some sort of productivity stuff. We'll be probably revisiting this machine for another video, I would think, at some point, looking at some other more maybe serious focused stuff. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed watching, and if you did, I hope you consider giving me a thumbs up or subscribing, and I hope to see you again on the channel in the future. Thanks for watching.